What is cognitive dissonance? In the field of psychology, cognitive dissonance is the perception of contradictory information. Relevant items of information include a person's actions, feelings, ideas, beliefs, and values, and things in the environment. Cognitive dissonance is typically experienced as psychological stress when they participate in an action that goes against one or more of them. According to this theory, when two actions or ideas are not psychologically consistent with each other, people do all in their power to change them until they become consistent. The discomfort is triggered by the person's belief clashing with new information perceived, wherein they try to find a way to resolve the contradiction to reduce their discomfort. In a theory of cognitive dissonance from 1957, Leon Festinger proposed that human beings strive for internal psychological consistency to function mentally in the real world. A person who experiences internal inconsistency tends to become psychologically uncomfortable and is motivated to reduce the cognitive dissonance. They tend to make changes to justify the stressful behavior, either by adding new parts to the cognition causing the psychological dissonance, rationalization, or by avoiding circumstances and contradictory information likely to increase the magnitude of the cognitive dissonance. Confirmation bias. Coping with the nuances of contradictory ideas or experiences is mentally stressful. It requires energy and effort to sit with those seemingly opposite things that all seem true. Festinger argued that some people would inevitably resolve dissonance by blindly believing whatever they wanted to believe. Reduction. Cognitive dissonance theory proposes that people seek psychological consistency between their expectations of life and the existential reality of the world. To function by that expectation of existential consistency, people continually reduce their cognitive dissonance in order to align their cognitions, perceptions of the world with their actions. The creation and establishment of psychological consistency allows the person afflicted with cognitive dissonance to lessen mental stress by actions that reduce the magnitude of the dissonance, realized either by changing with or by justifying against or by being indifferent to the existential contradiction that is inducing the mental stress. In practice, people reduce the magnitude of their cognitive dissonance in 4 ways. 1. Change the behavior or the cognition. I'll eat no more of this donut. 2. Justify the behavior or the cognition by changing the conflicting cognition. I'm allowed to cheat my diet every once in a while. 3. Justify the behavior or the cognition by adding new behaviors or cognitions. I'll spend 30 extra minutes at the gymnasium to work off the donut. Number 4. Ignore or deny information that conflicts with existing beliefs. This donut is not a high sugar food. 3. Cognitive biases or components of dissonance theory. The bias that one does not have any biases. The bias that one is better, kinder, smarter, more moral, and nicer than average. Especially in cults, you would think that. And confirmation bias. that a consistent psychology is required for functioning in the real world also was indicated in the results of the psychology of prejudice, wherein people facilitate their function in the real world by employing human categories like sex and gender, age and race, etc., with which they manage their social interactions with other people, based on a brief overview of models and theories related to cognitive consistency from many different scientific fields, such as social psychology, perception, neurocognition, learning, motor control, system control, ethology, and stress. It has even been proposed that all behavior involving cognitive processing is caused by the activation of inconsistent cognitions and functions to increase perceived consistency. That is, all behavior functions to reduce cognitive inconsistency at some level of information processing. Indeed, the involvement of cognitive inconsistency has long been suggested for behaviors related to, for instance, curiosity and aggression and fear, while it has also been suggested that the inability to satisfactorily reduce cognitive inconsistency may, dependent on the type and size of the inconsistency, result in stress. Selective exposure. Another method to reduce cognitive dissonance is through selective exposure theory. This theory has been discussed since the early days of Festinger's discovery of cognitive dissonance. He noticed that people would selectively expose themselves to some media over others. Specifically, they would avoid dissonant messages and prefer consonant messages. Through selective exposure, people actively and selectively choose what to watch, view, or read that fit to their current state of mind, mood, or beliefs. In other words, consumers select attitude-consistent information and avoid attitude-challenging information. This can be applied to media, news, music, and any other messaging channel. The idea is choosing something that is in opposition to how you feel or believe in will render cognitive dissonance. For example, a study was done in an elderly home in 1992 on the loneliest residents, those that did not have family or frequent visitors. The residents were shown a series of documentaries, 3 that featured a very happy, successful elderly person, and 3 that featured an unhappy, lonely elderly person. After watching the documentaries, the residents indicated they preferred the media featuring the unhappy, lonely person over the happy person. Of course, you would identify with that. This can be attested to them feeling lonely and experience cognitive dissonance watching somebody their age feeling happy and being successful. This study explains how people select media that aligns with their mood, as in selectively exposing themselves to people and experiences they are already experiencing. It is more comfortable to see a movie about a character that is similar to you than to watch one about someone who is your age who is more successful than you. Another example to note is how people mostly consume media that aligns with their political views. In a study done in 2015, participants were shown attitudinally consistent, challenging, or politically balanced online news. Results showed that the participants trusted attitude-consistent news the most out of all the others, regardless of the source. It is evident that the participants actively selected media that align with their beliefs rather than opposing media. In fact, recent research has suggested that while a discrepancy between cognitions drives individuals to crave for attitude-consistent information, the experience of negative emotions drives individuals to avoid counter-attitudinal information. In other words, it is the psychological discomfort which activates selective exposure as a dissonance reduction strategy. Belief disconfirmation. The contradiction of a belief, ideal, or system of values causes cognitive dissonance that can be resolved by changing the challenged belief. Yet, instead of effecting change, the resultant mental stress restores psychological consonance to the person by misperception, rejection, or refutation of the contradiction, seeking moral support from people who share the contradicted beliefs, or acting to persuade other people that the contradiction is unreal. The early hypothesis of belief contradiction presented in When Prophecy Fails from 1956 reported that faith deepened among the members of an apocalyptic religious cult, despite the failed prophecy of an alien spacecraft soon to land on Earth to rescue them. Earthly corruption. At the determined place and time, the cult assembled. They believed that only they would survive, yet the spaceship did not arrive to Earth. The confounded prophecy caused them acute cognitive dissonance. Had they been victims of a hoax? Had they vainly donated away their material possessions? To resolve the dissonance between apocalyptic, end-of-the-world religious beliefs and earthly material reality, most of the cult restored their psychological consonance by choosing to believe a less mentally stressful idea to explain the missed landing, that the aliens had given planet Earth a second chance at existence, which in turn empowered them to redirect their religious cult to environmentalism and social advocacy to end human damage to planet Earth. On overcoming the confounded belief by changing to global environmentalism, the cult increased in numbers by proselytism. The study to the Rebbe the Messiah and the Scandal of Orthodox Indifference reported the belief contradiction that occurred in the Chabad Orthodox Jewish congregation, who believed that their Rebbe was the Messiah. When he died of a stroke in 1994, instead of accepting that their Rebbe was not the Messiah, some of the congregation proved indifferent to that contradictory fact and continued claiming that Sneerson was the Messiah and that he would soon return from the dead. This is very similar to what happened in the cult I was in. So that fake guru, he died in 2007 from a heart attack, very unceremoniously, not a yogi's death at all. And, well, we just kept believing. And the cult continues on. I got disenchanted at some point because I just saw what was there at some point. But other people, they didn't. They kept believing, just like that, and are still in the cult, doing the same thing year after year after year. But for me, I got so bored out of my mind, and I need to learn new things because my mind needs to be really occupied. I love to study and learn about a lot of different topics. So maybe this is why I got so disenchanted and bored